All right, so next up, we're going to talk about Deion Sanders. So, pretty much right when we went off stream last week, this video went viral of Deion Sanders on the Rich Eisen show talking about some of the things that he looks for in a quarterback and how it's different than some of the things that he looks for in, for example, a defensive lineman when it comes to him being a head coach. And he caught a lot of flack for this comment. And I thought it was worth bringing up because it brought up, a lot of people felt as though he was, playing upon racial tropes of black men with these
No way.
comments. And they thought that it was in poor taste. They thought that what he said was in poor taste and it was racially charged. And so he got raked through the coals for making these comments on the Rich Eisen show. Now, to the best of my knowledge, I do not believe that Deion Sanders has walked any of these comments back. Um, I was looking this up earlier this afternoon. I could not find anything on the internet in which he walked anything back. I sincerely hope that he does not walk any of this back, but it got a lot of people talking about what he said. So we'll go ahead and listen to his comments about scouting and players and all of this kind of stuff, and then we will opine on what he had to say.
Quarterbacks are different.
Yeah.
We want mother, father, dual parent.
Mm-hmm.
We want that kid to be 3-5 and up because he got to be smart.
Mm-hmm.
Not bad decisions off the field at all,
Mm-hmm.
because he has to be a leader of men. It's so many different attributes and what we look for. Physical, offensive line. My defensive line is totally opposite.
What do you mean?
Single mama. Trying to get it. He's on free lunch.
I'm sorry, I did that.
Trying to make it.
Goddamn on that.
Like mama barely made the flight. Quarterbacks are different.
Yeah.
We want.
Damn. That boy said single mama.
Right. So that pissed a lot of people off. Marcus Spears chimed in. He didn't like it. Marcus Spears said that it wasn't funny. He also said he don't know Deion Sanders, so he's not going to necessarily cast aspersions upon his character. But those comments were in poor taste. You had a lot of people talking about how much in poor taste this was. Look, this is Chris Williamson here. This is just one of the comments. Deion ain't the only coach who think this way, sadly, but it hurts more when coming from black man. Another disappointing step in his journey. So a lot of people didn't like what he had to say. They felt like it was playing upon low-hanging fruit when it comes to black men and their intelligence or lack thereof and all of this other stuff that people just sort of, I think people read into his comments these things. I didn't necessarily think that he was saying that stuff or inferring it, but a lot of people had issue with this. Did you read any of that into what Deion said? Did you necessarily have a problem with anything that he said here? I thought that it was rather whatever, but a lot of people in black Twitter and black America at large took serious umbrage to Coach Prime's comments about quarterbacks and defensive linemen.
I don't have a problem with it. Have you seen defensive linemen? The good ones. Do you know the mentality that's necessary to be like an elite defensive lineman? Even if you're air quote undersized, like Aaron Donald, who's 6 foot tall, there still has to be. And I don't know his parental background. I'm just bringing up just the mentality and the oomph that's necessary, the gorilla, the animal that's necessary on a defensive and offensive line. You want some maulers down there. And if you have some guys that are mauling down there, they're fighting for a lot more than a scholarship. They're fighting for their mom. They're fighting for their family. They're the man of the house. They've been the man of the house. They're the man of the family, a lot of these guys. So they fight for that. So he was joking in the sense that when you're dealing with quarterbacks, quarterback is different than D-line. So quarterbacks requires high intellect. So I'm going to need some GPAs. I'm going to need somebody who's a good leader, a good facilitator. I'm gonna need somebody who saw dual parent households with structure, so that way they can give that structure to the rest of the team. There's more to and layers to the stuff that he was given as bullet points. But if you extrapolate it into the characteristics which makes a quarterback, the intangibles that make a good quarterback, he just named the bullet points that you look for: a GPA, a this, a that, solid rubric. Now, that's for quarterbacks because they have to be the leaders of the entire locker room. Honestly, my job is dependent on this one person. But then once you get to the defensive line, all of that stuff doesn't apply anymore. So the joke of single moms, why not? Because I needed 2-parent household over here. Why? For structure. Over here, defensive line, go tear somebody up. You don't need structure for that. You need chaos. Now, I'm not saying that there's no good D lineman or offensive lineman. Offensive linemen generally have good parents, by the way. I'm just go ahead and say that. And what I mean by that is you typically see that those are the big men who were raised well. And then the defensive linemen, they're animals. They're animals. You know, Vontez Burfict just tearing people's heads off. So when you're talking football, we're not talking all this other stuff. We're talking football. And when you're talking about filling a roster full of characteristics, all right, hey, I want my defensive lineman to be like this. I want my offensive lineman, my defensive back, my receivers to have this type of mentality. Honestly, if I was recruiting receivers, I would want a receiver that has a little diva in him. Why? Because he's a superstar and he wants the ball. He wants the ball so bad, he's going to get open. Unlike that other guy who's just fast. I want the diva. Sorry. Now, am I going to probably deal with some stuff? Yeah, but we also going to put up some numbers. Now, dealing in high school and college, you're really not going to have a problem. Well, maybe with NILs, you're really going to have real divas now. But the real diva receivers become a problem in the NFL. This guy's dealing with college recruits, high school kids. So he's looking at bullets. So I personally take zero offense to this. I've got more to say.
So let's Marcus Spears was a defensive lineman.
That's right.
Right. So if Marcus Spears' frustration with Deion's comments revolve around Deion's apparent insinuation that defensive linemen don't have to be smart, then even though I think that you're taking it too personally, I will nevertheless say you're justified in feeling some type of way about that, because Marcus Spears was a defensive lineman and he's a smart guy. I watch him on ESPN regularly, and he strikes me as an intelligent person. So if he's an intelligent person and he believes himself to be intelligent and he played D lineman, and Deion is saying, hey, you can be a D lineman and basically just be an oaf, then I can understand why Spears would feel some type of way about that, because Spears played D lineman and Spears is smart. But I don't think that's where Spears is coming from. I think Spears is coming from the racial component. And so when it comes to the racial component, like I listened to that clip several times, and it's hard to contextualize it because we didn't see the whole show, or at least I didn't. I don't know what was said 2 minutes before that or 2 minutes after that. But in that particular aspect, that part, I didn't hear Deion Sanders mention Black or African American in that part. I didn't. He was talking about football players. He didn't mention Black or African American. So at that point, you're assuming that by him bringing up things like free lunch and single parenthood, single mama, you're assuming that he's talking about Black kids. You're making that leap and you're being presumptuous in that regard. And that's where I think Deion's comments are being treated. I think Deion is being treated unfairly in that regard. And this is where this stuff gets overblown when it comes to sports, particularly college, particularly football and basketball. These coaches, like, are there outliers and exceptions where you do have coaches who feel some type of way about racial constitution? Maybe. I'm not going to completely dismiss that idea. But by and large, these people just want to win games. Deion wants to win football games. The majority of these coaches just want to win games. They don't care whether they don't care whether their defensive line is full of black kids or white kids. They don't care. They just want the best players on the defensive line to rush the quarterback, to get sacks and fumbles and force interceptions. Like, they don't care whether these kids are black or white. I don't think Deion cares whether his defensive linemen are black or white. I don't. I just think he wants to win games. And so, because I think Deion wants to win games and he doesn't care whether the defensive linemen are black or white, when he's making comments like that, talking about single mama or whatever, he's not saying black kids who are coming from single parent households or dealing with free lunch or mama barely made the flight. He's just talking about football players, defensive linemen in general, who might be coming from that circumstance. Now, if you want to infuse upon that your own conclusion that disproportionately those are going to comprise black kids, then that's you insinuating based upon your own preconceived notions with respect to Deion's comments. But at face value, Deion was just saying there is a difference between the things that we pay attention to when it comes to defensive linemen versus the things that we pay attention to when it comes to quarterbacks. The conversation around Deion's comments immediately devolved into a racial conversation. If it had just been left at the merit of intelligence when it comes to defensive linemen, I probably wouldn't have even picked this topic to talk about on this channel, because I would have just been like, all right, yeah, I kind of get why people are kind of mad. You know, if you want to sit here and just kind of talk about how defensive linemen overall can be stupid, I can kind of get where people might get upset, because you might have some parents whose kids were defensive linemen and they raised a smart kid. Like I said, Spears was a defensive lineman. He's a smart guy. You got a whole lot of people out here who play defense, who are on the defensive side of the ball, who are defensive linemen, and they're intelligent. So anything that goes counterintuitive to the idea that you can be smart and be a defensive lineman might strike a chord with certain people. But ain't nobody talking about the intelligent aspect of what he's talking about. They're talking about the racial stuff. And that is completely assumed. And the individuals who are sort of infusing race into his comments are being presumptuous based upon their own preconceived notions about race and football. I think Deion just wants to win, and he just recruits the best players he can. And I think that generally speaking, when he's recruiting defensive linemen, he's just saying it don't matter as much as being a quarterback, your relative level of intelligence or the familial environment that you come from. It's just about what are some of the things that we prioritize when it comes to drafting defensive linemen juxtaposed to quarterbacks. And that's completely, to me, fair and in bounds. But because people are so hypersensitive, especially when it comes to football and to a lesser degree basketball, if a person in Deion's position makes these sorts of comments, then other things are going to be brought into the equation that shouldn't apply unless Deion was being more apparent in terms of his invocation of these various themes, race notwithstanding. And I don't think he did that. But, that's just kind of what people do. They kind of go overboard with it. And I think that that's where Spears' contention with Deion, I don't think it has anything to do with the defensive lineman stuff. And I think it has everything to do with the race stuff. And it's just like, hey, man, look, it is what it is. I think we conveniently like to take advantage of these things to make a point, because I've heard black people or just people at large over and over say black people aren't the only ones who come from single parent households. White kids come from single parent households too. So what's the huggabaloo over bringing up single parenthood exclusively when it comes to black people? So you can't try to take the sting out of the single parent argument when it's convenient for you. But then when Deion makes an innocuous comment in which he isn't even mentioning race at all, you want to assume that he's talking about racial stuff. It kind of seems to me as though we're trying to have our cake and eat it too when it comes to this. I don't really think he was thinking along those lines, which is why I don't think he is being made to apologize for it, and he hasn't walked it back. Like I said, I hope he continues to not walk it back, because I don't necessarily have a problem with what he said, even though social media troll world has all of the problems with what he said.
Well, and I don't even think, to sit around and to think even for Marcus Spears, which, by the way, I also think I'm a fan of what he does. Even all that ESPN stuff with the yelling and stuff, he's the more tolerable person out of that whole fiasco. So I'm a fan of his. But when it comes to this situation, I disagree. And because if you really do, I mean, if you sit down, do you really think, does anybody really think Deion, well, outside of the people that were just haters that he left Jackson State, do they think he really hates black people? Do they think Deion is some I think people think Deion's some big time buck dancing sellout Sambo man. I think that this is a image that people are starting to paint to him. Now, granted, yeah, he's talking about single parent households and this and that, barely making the flight. You know, he ain't say nothing about watermelons or fried chicken. So I didn't hear any stereotypes towards black people. And like you said, you, sir, are making an assumption. Now, granted, generally speaking, when you're talking about defensive linemen and all this other stuff, you probably are talking about African Americans. But I would also come back to you and say, but do you think Deion Sanders hates black kids? In order to do what Deion Sanders did at Jackson State, and everybody knows the record, all right? Him coming out of pocket, them stealing money from the football team, this and this and this and that. Him bringing the spotlight, all that good stuff. You think a man who hates black people does that? So he sacrificed years of his life to do that. And on top of that, he created a legacy that people can now emulate in the future of what to do with HBCUs, what to do with young black boys trying to play football. Just being a coach and a father figure for guys on his teams who don't have moms or dads or whatever. So he see these guys. Y'all sitting on Twitter. No locker room of men where there's 80-something people on your team and 60% of them come from single-parent households. Y'all don't do the metrics. Y'all don't see these kids in the eye every day. So what are y'all talking about? So Deion Sanders is honestly one of the most hated on people because of how baller he is. Now, granted, he's got a little extra flair and he's going to get a little flary on you, but his flair only offends people who aren't confident in themselves. Deion displays a self-confidence that most Americans wish they had. And when he's out there doing what he wants to do, when he wants to do it, how he wants to do it, saying it how he wants to say it, a lot of people who are corny have an issue with Deion Sanders being himself. He's not going to hold his tongue on Rich Eisman's show. And just like how we were saying earlier, he was just comparing the two. Quarterbacks are like this. They have to be specific. You can roll the dice on that kid who came from a single parent household with a 2.8 GPA. Roll that dice. That kid's getting suspended in 2 years. You wasted a whole scholarship, recruiting all that time and energy. The boy never played a snap. Or you got the 3.5 kid with two parents. You know, got him in early enrollment and all this other stuff. This kid's going to be there. He's not going to get kicked off the team. This guy been around football his whole life. He knows what to look for. Get over it. Marcus Spears as well. Because there's a degree of this that you also understand where he's coming from. But there's also a degree of you working for ESPN.
Yeah.
And so there's a degree that you have to have something to say about what he just said.
Yep.
So I'm not buying Spears' take. I think that the people on the internet that got their panties in a bunch are just Deion haters from day one, looking for anything to kick up dust on his name, you know. And so forget those people out there. You know, I've seen all type of stuff. Oh, Deion think he going to Colorado, and you know, what about powernomics in the black community? Save your powernomics. All right. So let this man go out there, do his best Obama impersonation. You know, yeah, give some good visuals, show us what black coaches can do. You know, go out there, do your thing, and ball out. I'm a fan of it, man. And honestly, bro, if Lord willing, I'm going to Colorado this upcoming season, and I will be watching the game.
Yeah,
So, I
yeah.
will be out
Well,
there.
I want to get out there and watch one too. Just as long as it's got to be earlier in the season
It's
because
gotta
I'm
be
not going
early.
out there when it gets cold. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we could talk about this online, but I think the Nebraska game, it's like a few games where it's like, hey, it's gonna be
Yeah.
done, but I'm gonna go. I'm gonna be there.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. What's like, yeah, I just,
Boy, them white folks in hey, they gonna be like, why, we wanted Deion Sanders. But these guys in my Airbnb, all right. Yeah. Oh, it's legal out there too. So they
oh
gonna
yeah,
be
I know. Oh yeah. Oh yeah,
oh,
it's gonna be a party. But one thing whenever racial dynamics are a part of the national conversation, um, at least this is what I've observed, uh, is you know, whether it's the mainstream media, news shows, sports, especially if it's a topic that revolves around an athlete or a sport, it gets talked about because usually what happens if it's big enough, if it's a big enough topic and it happened in sports, it also gets picked up by mainstream media, and so it gets talked about on Fox and CNN and MSNBC and all of these other networks and stuff. And whenever they talk about it and they bring these panels on to discuss these topics, you will always get people who are wanting to dispel the idea that there is a direct correlation between single parent households and the plight of the African American community. I see it all the time. Like Bomani Jones years ago was on Dan Lebatard's show because one of his things is talking about how black kids being from single parent households has nothing to do or is not an indicator of whether they're going to be able to become successful or fall into trouble or all of these other things that other people might assume. You know how it is. Like they'll say, oh, well, he didn't come from a structured household with two parents and that's why they're all messed up. And so you have a lot of people who want to dispel this idea that there is a correlation between between being raised within a single parent context and being prone to some of the trappings that tend to follow black people in this country. And so to that, I'll say, okay, fine. If we want to do that and we want to talk about how there is no correlation between single parent households or lack thereof, because other communities deal with single parent households too, right? White kids get raised by single parents, children of divorce, all of this kind of stuff. It's not just black people who deal with this.
right.
If we're going to be consistent in believing that there is no correlation or causation with the single parent dynamic, then we must therefore be consistent enough to not be presumptuous and think that what Deion Sanders' comments were about was laced in anything that was race based. So let's just be consistent across the board. Because I'm willing to agree. Like, if we want to go far enough as to say that single parenthood has nothing to do with this stuff, then let's also be consistent enough to say Deion's comments had nothing to do with race. Because I genuinely don't think they did. I just think that he's a football coach who's trying to recruit the best players to win games. So, when it comes to the defensive line, he's just going to look for certain things on the defensive line that aren't necessarily some of the things that he looks for when it comes to his quarterback. And whether the kid's black or white has nothing to do with it. It can be a 6'5" trailer park white kid who's good on the defensive line, who's being raised by a single mom and has a 2.5 GPA or whatever. These things are possible. You statistically, you might say it's not. Statistically, it's probably more often than not going to be black people. But again, if we want to dispel the notion that single parenthood is something that is uniquely, inextricably bound to the black existence, then let's also say that it's let's also be consistent and say that Deion's comments weren't necessarily laced in race. But you hit on something that's very appropriate. Spears does work for ESPN. and ESPN, and this is again speculation. I'm not saying that this is why Spears said what he said, but I'm just going to say that when you are someone who has sort of made a name for yourself, being a part of this social justice thing where you always have to lend your voice to these topics and sort of talk about these things like race and all of this other stuff, even in situations where it doesn't necessarily fit, you're going to sort of put that language in there because you kind of feel like as though you're speaking to your own personal brand. And so, could that be a place that Marcus Spears came from? I don't know. It could be. I'm not going to say it is, but I'm also not going to say it isn't. But moreover, I just think that this is a football conversation, and people just need to leave it at that instead of assuming that Deion was being this nefarious race bait, not even race baiting, but just this person who was assuming that black kids automatically come from single parent households. If we want to say that they don't, and that's a stereotype and a trope, then let's be consistent enough to believe that Deion wasn't playing into that and he was just talking about defensive linemen in general. Like, that's pretty much it. But this is just what happens with the internet. He must have been playing to low hanging fruit and the small and sort of some of the most basic tropes when it comes to black people in America. And I just kind of think it's uncalled for. And Deion does get called to the carpet for being this, whatever you want to say. I don't know, sell out or whatever. But look, man, it's like Jay-Z said in that song, "Devil is a lie." The devil wants black people to hate their own kind. Or what does he say? Devil want these. I'm gonna edit it because he's used other words, but he said, devil want these people to hate their own kind. It's got to be the Illuminati if a brother shines, or I can't be a brother if a brother is rich, or it has to be the devil. That's some black people stuff. And go ahead and listen to the song for yourself if you don't know what I was saying there. But those were some true lyrics because that is what we do to each other. That's what we did with Deion with these comments, and I think that they were uncalled for.
And the last thing I'll say is that Deion has always attracted this energy, always. And if you remember in the 90s, early 90s, I'm talking about the Florida State days, after Florida State. I mean, the guy has been a walking headline. And, he took, a hiatus after he retired in the sense of, now he was still on NFL Network. He was still doing this, but he wasn't in your face like he is now. And he's in your face again like he's in the league. So you're going to have to hear his name. And so, but when you have to hear Deion's name, he's going to make you hear it. And he has a very unique ability of doing that every single time. And that's going to attract, like moths to a flame. People are just going to gravitate towards it. And it brings all of it. His energy is so bright that it brings everybody to him. And he's a polarizing figure. Either you love him or you hate him. Either you like what he's doing or you think he's doing too much. There's no in between on Deion. Yeah. And so in this situation here, I'm clearly on the side of, oh, come on, it's Deion, bro. Like, do you think he hates black people? What do you think he has negative visions towards black people? I mean, his own kids are products of single parent households, if you will, because they're from divorces. So, I mean, I'm pretty sure he's aware and weighing these things in when he says what he says. Like, get over it, people. But he's a polarizing figure. So either you love him or everything he says rubs you the wrong way. He's too confident in what he does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can't be that confident in what you say. You can't make your words rhyme at random. Who do you think you are? Yeah, and he does it. Pull it out of his hat. Made it rhyme right on the spot. Gave you a parable. And everybody in the audience is like, well, gosh. Yeah. Myself included at home watching. And I'm like, man, this guy didn't lose a step. So Coach Prime, been a fan my entire life, will remain a fan. I only like Colorado's colors in the 90s. Now I'm a Colorado fan. So go Buffs and middle fingers to the haters.
Yeah, I hope Colorado goes like 13-0. It's not gonna happen, but I just hope that it does. That's me.
Not next year, but in a couple years, If they national championship bound, I'm all there for it.
Yeah. Yeah, I just, people just don't.
Stop stealing recruits from Miami though. Okay.
Yeah, we just don't give we just don't give people grace for comments anymore. We immediately go to the triggering and the defensive-ness. And it's like, what in and I say this about every other person who I've defended when it comes to this cancel culture stuff. Gina Carano, Nick Cannon, Kyrie Irving, Kanye West, anybody, I tend to defend all of them unless they truly say some reprehensible stuff. It's like, okay, you want to get mad at this person and feel some type of way, but let's look at this individual's history. Does this individual's history suggest that they're truly the type of person that you think they are because they made this one comment, or are you just or are you just being triggered by this one comment? There's nothing in Deion's history to suggest that he does not have empathy or compassion or any of that stuff for the plight of Black kids, young Black people, whatever. There's nothing in his history to suggest that. So for us to go overboard because he said this and really cast aspersions upon his character because you feel as though he was giving Black people and Black kids a bad name, in my opinion, is a bit overboard. But I'm also, again, not surprised because that's what it is. It's either nothing at all or completely overboard. So, hey, man, I'm rooting for Colorado as well. My two teams that I'll be rooting for in college football next season will be Florida State University and Colorado. Hey, man, hey, y'all look.
Okay.
You can have that.
Okay. Okay.
Man, y'all got so much drama. Y'all got so much issues down there. It ain't even fun.
Hey, get out of my business. Get out of our business. We're not in y'all. Get out of ours.
Do your thing, Coach Prime. Keep doing your thing, man.
Salute,
Straight
Prime.
up.
Salute.